Bede, time to make money. Let's talk. Is Kenya in a debt crisis? You'll be very surprised because the numbers don't lie, but the media will be lying every day. I have a very should I say healthy suspicion, especially of those technical narratives that are being propagated by people who don't understand what they're talking about. Is Kenya in a debt crisis? The news is shouting. The headlines are insane. Everybody is like, oh my gosh, we're about to sink. We're about to lose our country. All kinds of stories. Our country has been mortgaged. When is the SGR? Where's the SGR contract? And so on. But I want to engage you in the next 8 minutes about the subject. Is Kenya in a debt crisis? Let me give you a spoiler that, first of all, contrary to what you think, Kenya actually does not have so much debt the way you actually think. As a matter of fact, a country like Japan, let me give an example. Can I give an example of Japan? Can you imagine Japan? Let's pull it up for you because I don't want you to trust my word for it. You can quickly see that the debt to GDP ratio of Japan is an average of 260%. Quick one for those of us who are not so strong in this matters economics. What is GDP? GDP, gross domestic product, is basically the total monetary value of what a country produces per type. Meaning, if we took all the goods that we produced last year, if we took all the services that we produced last year and we priced them, the monetary value then becomes our GDP. So countries with higher GDPs normally would have higher per capita income because they are generating a lot of money as a country, but that's a story for another. Now, the debt to GDP ratio is debt as a percentage of what we produced as a nation. Another way of looking at it is you can look at debt as a percentage of your payroll or of your salary. So for instance, if you're earning 100,000 shillings and you have debt worth 20,000 bob, it basically means then that your debt to salary ratio is 20%, i.e., the debt you owe is only 20% really of your income. When you're looking at organizations, if you're looking at a business, this is the so-called gearing ratio, where the organization will look at, okay, fine, what is the long-term debt as a percentage of our assets? Okay, it's a balance sheet ratio that shows the possibility of the solidity of a company as far as debt is concerned. Normally, these ratios usually help us to, as it were, predict the possibility or the likelihood of payment. So lower ratios suggest higher likelihood of payment. For instance, if your debt to salary ratio is 20%, there is very high likelihood that you will pay. But if your debt to salary is 300%, it means it will take you at least 3 cycles for you to be able to pay your debt. So the question I'm asking us here today is Kenya in a debt crisis? Listen here. So there's quite a lot that the headlines are not saying. As a matter of fact, I want you to check this with me. Kenya's debt to GDP ratio is around 68%. Let's do some comparison, okay? Let's compare with Japan. Japan is 260%. So the debt to GDP ratio of Japan is 260%. That already disembargoes the idea that higher ratios are bad for nations. Here's the second one. Look at the US. The US rate of debt to GDP ratio is 122%. Here's another one. France, 111%. Here's another one. UK at 100%. 100%. Can you imagine that the UK debt to GDP ratio is 100%, yet you will never see a headline screaming that, oh my gosh, the country is about to collapse. Oh my gosh, we have such a huge high debt to GDP ratio that our country is not doing well. Listen, if Kenya was a household, if we were a house, if we were a domestic setup like a family home, then a debt to GDP ratio of 68% is not ideal, right? Can you see this guy? A debt to GDP ratio is not ideal, right? But because Kenya is not a household and Kenya is actually an economy, a debt to GDP ratio of 68% is not bad at all. As a matter of fact, The numbers don't lie. In developing economies, we can show you empirical study. There are very many papers. I'll attach some of them down on this video. There are very many papers that have linked high debt to development, especially in developing nations. Let me give you one more statistics. Do you know that 48%, almost 50%, between 40 and 50% of Kenya's public debt is actually local? That means it's owed to local banks. That means it's owed to local institutions. That means it's owed to local individuals like you and I. What does that mean? It means that if the government is borrowing local, what is happening then is that the local debt is revenue earning for local players. Do you know what that means? That means jobs in Kenya. Do you know what that means? That means that there are banks that are open today because of public debt. There are very many enterprises that are open today because government is borrowing local. Another thought that you have to keep in view is that every time a government borrows locally, it is good for the economy. Do you know why? The problem is you don't know why. Because you are so used to fake media. You are so used to politicized statements that anything good that anybody tells you, we have so much self-hate in this country that it doesn't matter. Do you realize that we have so much self-hate that anybody who say any good thing, including what I'm saying today here, I know I'm going to attack. I know people will come and say, I'm holding brief for the government, or if one day I do a government job, somebody will come and say, you see, this has always been a government person. Check the economics. When a government borrows locally, what happens is that it reduces the money circulation. Kissinger, that's what it does. It reduces money circulation. So once money circulation is reduced, what happens is called mopping up in economics. When mopping up occurs, what you're doing is that you are reducing economic heat. That means you are able to bring down inflation. When government does local borrowing is not just to fund government, but local borrowing also aids the government in dealing with inflationary pressures. Why? Because when you borrow locally, what you have done, when the government floats a treasury bill, what you have done is that individuals, players, institutions will now go and take their money and purchase these instruments. When they purchase those instruments, consequently, it means then that those monies that have been invested in these government instruments are no longer in circulation. What does that do to inflation? It reduces inflation. So in one aspect, inflation is reduced. Now, let me help you a little bit, my comrade, because as Kenyans, I am of the view we shouldn't hate ourselves so much so that we have everything is bad news. Please examine the economics. Here's the second one, which nobody will tell you. According to an economic principle postulated and concretized in what is regarded as the Phillips curve, the Phillips curve works like this, that anytime you have high inflation, you have low unemployment. And when you have low inflation, you have high unemployment. While granted, when the government reduces inflation, unemployment increases. But remember, when the government borrows locally, the government does not borrow that money to store it or invest it in China or invest it in Germany. The government will borrow locally and invest it locally. You remember the GDP, a biggest part of that gross domestic product is expenditure by government. As a matter of fact, it is an economic principle that government is the biggest driver of expenditure. Kizita, did you know that government is the biggest demand creator? So they are borrowing locally, reduce inflation, gives you more money. So when every time the government is borrowing, it's good for you because your money becomes more powerful. And then you will argue, but we will have more unemployment. When unemployment increases, the same money that government borrowed, they will now spend it in the economy, in projects, in projects, in roads, in bridges, in railways, in schools, in hospitals, and in spending. What does that do? It gives signal to the supply side. When the supply side, that's where you come in. When the supply side is given a signal, then you begin to supply. It is that concentric borrowing, paying, buying, spending, etc. that spurs economic growth. So government borrowing is not a bad thing. Number two, government borrowing ratios of north of 50%, north of 100% is not a bad thing. Number three, 48% of Kenya's public debt is locally owned. It is owned from you and I. You are bitter because you're not participating. I have argued and encouraged you, my brother, comrade. I've argued and encouraged us. Let's buy treasury bonds. Let's buy bills. Let us participate in the secondary bond market. Be part and parcel of the wealth that is being created. So what have we done with our public debt? That is the question that we are not asking enough. And I could be wrong, I could be right, but statistics don't lie. The numbers don't lie. I am doing this video and my team is cringing because of the possibility of a lot of feedback, kickbacks, and political hate, but we do it whichever way, because the challenge of this nation is that lies have been propagated very loudly while truth has been submerged and nobody wants to talk about the truth. Let's examine some numbers. We have borrowed, yes, significantly, but I want us also to explain these numbers away. For instance, the standard gauge railway has transported 14 million passengers. Explain for me that away. You want to tell me that the president is the wrong one. The previous one was the wrong one. The one before that one stole elections. For us, nobody is good. This self-hate is killing the innovation of this nation. Where is the gratefulness? Look here. The standard gauge railway has transported, Kisicha, 14 million passengers. Right? Do you know, guess how many tons of cargo the standard gauge railway has transported? The standard gauge railway has transported 38 million tons of cargo since 2017. Let's do a mathematic. 38 million tons of cargo. 38 million tons of cargo. Do you know what that is? You know, some of us, we don't even know what that is. Okay, 38 million tons, 38 million. I want to show you how many trucks those are. 38 million tons of cargo. Okay, a 40 foot, do you know how many tons it carries? Like 28 tons. I do truck business, I know this. It carries 28 tons. This is 1,357,000 40 foot. We don't have the roads for it. The economic growth, listen, the reason why Nairobi is becoming the G1 of Africa, the reason why Kenya is becoming the Silicon, listen, we are dominating this continent on every side. 1,357,142 40-foot containers. Which other country has done that? Tell me, show me which other country has done that. How do you do it? We need to do the debts. Here's another one. Do you know right now, in 2013, our electrification was only 36%. 36%. Today, right now, we are at 80% electrification. Tell me which other country has that. Tell me which other country has that. While we have been given and sold a narrative that public debt is bad, and the problem of that narrative is that it has now put our leaders, our politicians, I'm not supporting anybody, I'm not trying to promote anybody, but the reality of the ground is that this narrative has now put our back against the wall, and our leaders are unable to objectively, as it were, analyze what that is our best way out as a nation, and they're unable to decide progressively, they're unable to decide objectively because they don't know if you'll go on the streets tomorrow. They don't know if she'll go on the streets tomorrow. They don't know. Look at the statistics. Japan is at 236. I don't know. I'm about to slap 236%. Japan is at 236% debt to GDP ratio. All these nations that we are admiring, they grew by debt because it is revenue earning. It's revenue earning debt. Now, let me give you something. Let me give you now one more. When you look up the Africa Infrastructure Development Index, we are in the top 10%. That is not debt now, baby. That is developments. Well, you don't like how that sounds. Do you know why you don't like how that sounds? Because of self-hate. Because somebody has sold you a narrative that is advancing their own selfish objective and crafting for them a position of relevance, and everybody is listening. I agree. We have systemic issues that need to be fixed. I agree that there are serious challenges with what we did with the money. But despite our suboptimal handling and management of the resources, there is still some serious progress that we have been able to achieve because of public debt. There is work that we need to do as far as our management concerned. But can you see that even with our some optimal management, right? Even with and I'm arguing, and I want to speak to those of us in Kenya here, those of us who believe we do have solutions for the country. We need to hear your voices more. You are complaining in your house, poisoning everybody, poisoning your friends, but we are not hearing your voice. Bring your mind to the table. Give the government alternative ideas. Let's have conversation around what do we do. Please separate management and the impact of debt. Let me say like this. It is true that we have lost billions, but please, I want you to objectively separate structural failure from strategic borrowing. Of course, we have wire to do now. The Auditor General's report does highlight misuse. In fact, they have the misuse was up to 30%. And comparatively, that does bring a challenge in the short run and also in the long run. If you're to do a comparison of these nations that have grown with debt, like Japan, Vietnam, Singapore, Taiwan, if you look at their trajectory, their strategy was go hard on borrowing, but also go hard on institution building. Now, the work of institution building is not the work of any one individual, including the president. Institution building is a work that should happen. We begin by legislation. That's a parliament's job, right? And then once the parliament says these are the institutions we need, and the parliament are truly the representative of the people. So as opposed to saying we are borrowing too much, the conversation must be which institutions do we need fixing now? Which institutions do we need so that in this next phase, where we go from here as a nation, when we are borrowing in this next phase, which institutions do we need to move debt to GDP ratio to 100%? And then what institutions do we need to be able to deploy that debt correctly? Let's begin to learn this play. So you will find that already right now already, there are serious financial reforms that are already happening from 2024. And the reason why you don't know about them is because there is such a huge, loud voice of negativity, pessimism, and we are going to die and about to die. Anything is bad. We only have one country. Let's build the country. So there's already reforms. Let me cancel for you. Let me give you three. For instance, there's conversation around new debt ceilings. There's conversation around better accountability. There are even bills at law. There's even bills in parliament currently that deals with accountability, deals with the conflict of interest between politicians and doing business with government, right? We're having stricter fiscal controls, the government expenditure. While I know you don't agree with me because a lot of the information you have is from the newspaper. That's the stuff we have all over, the information we have. But if you look at the government expenditure, the one that is put on the newspaper is for specific aspects. But across government, speak to your government friends, they will tell you that expenditure is reducing. I want to propose to us an alternative view. The alternative view is let numbers do the talking and let research do the validation. As a matter of fact, he that does not research has no right to speak. Because what is he speaking? He's giving the presentation of his own ignorance that is backed without any data. Let us meet on the table of data and research. And here are some I want to share with some. So here's the angle nobody is showing you. First of all, nations grow through leverage. That is an established empirical formula. It's the same way we say that leverage grows companies. For instance, Colgate is levered at 95%. That means when Colgate puts 5 shillings, their 5 shillings act like 35 shillings. That's the power of debt. That debt improves the strength of your punch. If you're in a boxing match and you're Mike Tyson, I remember Mike Tyson was born, Mike Tyson won his world championship 8 days after I was born, right? On the 20th of January. And he entered and the guy was swinging. And on the first left, he came back with the right hook. And that's how the man came down, right? And they said Tyson could punch. I don't know what was the force of his punch. But think of it this way, that Tyson is swinging a right hook. The power of that right hook is dependent upon the power of his biceps. Now think of this. When you take debt, you're borrowing biceps. So you're taking, it's one pan, but it is 10 biceps. That's the power of it. So nations grow through leverage. So let's now see what has been the growth of Kenya. In 2023, Kenya's GDP grew by 5.6%. We had higher borrowing, right? And it grew by 5.6%. Kisija, I know you don't know this. The only thing you know is needy. If you edit this part, I'm coming to your house. You only know, the only thing you hear is what the newspaper is. But the truth of the matter is that GDP grew by 5.6% in 2023. Guess what? It was faster than in 2022, which was at what number? What number was it? Can you please tell me what number it was? Nobody knows. It was 4.9%. So debt already gave us the growth last year. Okay, fantastic. And you can track debt and GDP growth. Now, do you know in 2024, just last year, our diaspora remittances, guess what it was? It was $4.9 billion. That's the diaspora. This story that the economy is dying. You see, the thing about numbers is, I could have 10 numbers and I could use 3 to tell you that you should kill yourself. Yet I could use 3 to tell you that it's time to give back. The future is bright. You see that? Okay, let's continue. Do you know that in the year 2024, last year, Kenya led the whole continent when it comes to startup funding? We led, I know this figure, this is my very industry, $684 million was invested in this country in startup funding. Nobody else beat us. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? That there's gloom and doom. You are going nowhere as a nation. Okay. So maybe the issue is not that. The issue is, what do you believe about Kenya? What do you tell you what I believe about Kenya? Number one, we're the mentorship nation. We're the ones who are supposed to show Africa how easy it is to become a first world economy in this. And we are shortly pulling it. I once had I do mining in TZ. I don't know if you know a place called Dodoma. And before you go to Dodoma, there's when I'm always driving down via the border on the Kenya side, right? And then I go to, you start with Arusha, then Moshi, then Mombo. Momo has the best nyama choma. You eat this thing is melting. It's something you'd pay at Fogo Gaucho proper. You buy this on the streets in TZ. And so one day we are prospecting cobalt. And when you're prospecting cobalt, do you know what happens? This guy says, we talk Nairobi and we talk Nairobi together. Hey, and do you know what he says? He says that for us in Tanzania, when we want to go to Europe, our parents tell us to go to Nairobi. That if you want to, can you imagine? That is what Africa is speaking about us. They say, if you want to see, okay, fantastic. I do business in Kampala. Yeah, as a matter of fact, my house is in a place called Chambogo Drive. Just right to Chambogo University. Spend me from town. I have some projects there. And one day, I have this border guy who I send for Anakiti. I'm sending for tomatoes. I'm sending for this stuff. And then I tell you, by the way, do you know about Nairobi? Do you know about KSL? What are you talking about? All our ministers, all our MPs, all their children, they are born in Nairobi Hospital. All of them, they are born in they come to Aga Khan Hospital. They tell us how, if you want to go to Europe, just go to Nairobi. The question is not public debt. The question is, what do you think about your country? It's challenging if everybody else thinks we are better than us ourselves. That self-hate is something we need to cure. I did a study, and I was reading some studies about mass psychology and development, right? And I found actually a study where the author argued that when the populace of nations have self-hate, it's actually not a problem of public debt, but it's a problem of mental colonization. Our mentality has been colonized, but ideas that are poured into us, they are distant from reality, but those ideas have been crafted to advance political, political interests of which you're not part of. So you have embraced an idea that is advancing political interest of which you're not part of, yet you have followed it hook, line, and sinker. Okay, so the paper begins to argue, and this was from a journal of psychology and sociology, because numbers don't lie, but mindsets do. Mindsets do. So they found that many Kenyans are already suffering from internalized defeat. So we already defeated a poverty identity. So we don't trust our own products. Have you realized that you want to buy every other product except Kenyans? Okay? We insult our own currency. Like the amount of self-hate we have, we insult our own currency. Here's another one. That we laugh at our own leaders before we ever challenge them to be better. That the day you elect your MP is the day he stopped being the better option. From there, henceforth, he has to deal with pelt. Had you realized that every leader that comes into this country, we love them before the election. After the election, we hate them. There's a scientific study here. I'm going to kill you. You see? So the author argues that's not patriotism. It's actually self-hate. Then he says that what's happening is that a 2024 same study on national identity found that a weak sense of belonging leads to a lower civic engagement and economic risk aversion. In short, a country that does not believe in itself will self-implode. So while we have serious, strong, proven, and man body, much love to you, the man is coming up with serious, very serious initiatives, economic initiatives that are tested and tried. Treasury House. Treasury is very hot right now. If you look at the man's hair, he's even losing his hair right now. He's coming with a very strong initiative. But because of self-hate, a national identity that is degrading. We don't love our own. We don't love our own products. We don't promote our own. Do you remember which of your friends did you do for a business opening party? Which of your friends have you invested in? Which of your friends have you borrowed a loan for? You cannot do it with this self-hate, everything is bad, we are doomed. That thinking, research shows, will lead to economic aversion. Listen, this country will not build itself. We need to stop behaving like orphans, and we now need to start building like owners. We need to stop. Listen, if you're a trader, it is time to trade harder. Not trading for your family only. Trading as a service to the generations. If you're a doctor, teach better right now. If you're a teacher, teach harder. Every time we are saying Kenya is finished, we are prophesying our own doom. You are cursing the ground upon which you are standing. A better perspective is this. Let us now start a culture of looking at the numbers. Listen, if the truth matters to you, I want to challenge you today to share this video. Flood the algorithm the facts. While the voice of deception will be louder, the voice of truth will even be louder. As a business person in this country, listen, we now have a proprietary algorithm which we are using to buy 10,000 apartments in Lagos. We're using it to buy 10,000 apartments in Accra, Ghana. We're using to buy 10,000 apartments in Chiga, Rwanda, and Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and Nairobi. I can tell you as a matter of fact that we are buying more apartments in Nairobi than all these other African nations combined. Why? Because of yield, baby. The numbers don't lie. We are outperforming many. Second to Ghana only. Only Ghana is ahead of us on rental yield. Check the numbers. Your country is doing well. Remove yourself from the company of lies and self-hate and enter into the company of facts. Is Kenya in a debt crisis? I've given you my facts. Give me yours. When I look at the facts, I don't think Kenya is in a debt crisis. Kenya, though, is in a crisis. Can you guess the crisis? It's an identity crisis. My name is Agacho. Follow us for this content and more.